We're continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Yud, Amud Aleph, right before the Mishnah, really, 4 lines up from the beginning of the white lines to these Amud, is being learned as a Zchut Rufuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, and for Nisan Ben Miriam, that should all have Rufuah Shelema B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This Amud also been dedicated as a zchut for the Shea family, the Kohen family, Dayan families, should be an ultimate zchut for all the Mishpachot B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Okay, so a quick recap. We started a halacha, Tan Rabbanan, about 12 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, Tet Amud Bet, that Besukot Teshvu Shivat Yamim, a Sukkah al Gabe Sukkah is, that Sukkah al Gabe Sukkah is Pasul. If you have a double-decker Sukkah, so to speak, it's Pasul. How do we know it? We know it from Besukot Teshvu Shivat Yamim, which means you have to sit in single Sukkah. The Gemara said, wait a second, Sukkot means multiple Sukkot. It literally means a plural form, that you're sitting simultaneously in 2 sukkot, I would have thought, and that you're actually sitting in a sukkah tachat sukkah and still is kasher. In fact, maybe you should be doing that, the new chumrah of the year. But sukkot, it has to be doubles. I said, no. Amar Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he explained that that's exactly why in the Krei Ketiv of the Chumash, it's written without a wav. It doesn't have a vav when it says basukot, it's written basukat, and therefore it's coming to teach you that it has to be a single sukkah, and a sukkah al gabe sukkah is going to be pasul. Now, then we had a very interesting dissection of all the cases from Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, really, you could have all 4 possibilities. I could tell you that both the top and the bottom sukkah could be kasher. I could tell you a scenario that both the top and the bottom sukkah would be pasul. I could tell you a case that the top one would be kasher but not the bottom one. The bottom one would be kasher but not the top one. And the Gemara explained, gave a scenario for each one of them. But what happened was, there's one thing that could explain everything in these 4 scenarios, and that is, if you have a sukkah which its schach is chamata meruba misilata, and that it has more sun than shade, it's a, let's call it a flimsy schach, not a good schach. It's considered as though it's not there. Which, it's very simple. We could deal with that. We could understand that. And that basically makes it that many of the cases is not even considered sukkah tachat sukkah. For instance, what are the cases of both kasher, both pasul? Very simple. Both kasher would be that the top one is less than 20 amot from the ground level, and it has a good schach. The bottom one doesn't have a good schach. It's chamata yoter meruba misilata, and therefore even when you're sitting on the bottom one, you're really using the schach of the top one. That's pretty simple. So the Gemara said on the halakha, on this memra of Rabbi Yirmiyah, pshita, it's pashut. All these things, okay, for a 5th grader maybe you have to explain, but it's simple. The yesod, the fundamental yesod is, do you have a good schach? Do you not have a good schach? If you don't have a good schach, then it's really one sukkah. It's not sukkah al gabe sukkah. And if you have a good schach, then you have a sukkah al gabe sukkah. It's pasul. It's always pasul, consistently. Mara said no. There's one of the 4 cases that is the chidush of Rabbi Yirmiyah. And that is when you have a sukkah that the bottom one is kasher and the top one is pasul. Let's review. What was the case of bottom kasher, top pasul? The bottom one has a nice, good, healthy schach. The top one doesn't have a good schach. It's chamata meruba misilata. So therefore, we understand why the top one is pasul. The bottom one is kasher. But here is the catch. the schach of the top one has to be lower than 20 amot from the ground of the bottom one. Because if it is higher than 20 amot from the ground level of the bottom sukkah, then it's going to be schach pasul, which is going to be mistaref with schach kasher. It's going to become a problem. This enters the machloket rishonim that we mentioned before of the Tosafot and the Ravya, and therefore we have the chidush of Rabbi Yirmiyah, because we may have thought that if you allowed this sukkah to pass, even though that the schach of the top one is within the 20 from the bottom floor, people will not really care how tall it is, and they would even allow when the schach of the top sukkah is higher than 20 amah from the floor of the bottom one, and that would get into a problem. Kamash Malan Rabbi Yirmiyah is teaching us that we don't make that gezerah. We are not concerned about that. Now, this we could relate to, because especially when you have your own nice schach on the bottom sukkah, you're not really looking at the top sukkah. And you think to yourself, well, the top sukkah is a kosher schach anyways, it's beams, it's wood, it's just not enough. And when it's not enough, it's always kasher. So we're not going to think that, oh, this is actually lemala me'esrim amah from the ground level of the bottom one. So we may have thought that we should make that gezerah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah comes to teach us this very valid chidush of us not being concerned about that, and we still allow it so long as the schach of the top one is below 20 amot from the ground level of the bottom one.
How is it that we go from, if it's below 20, we just completely ignore it, but then if it's above 20, it puzzles?
Well, because, a good question, because when it's above 20, the schach, as you know, as much as you paid for that Chinese bamboo mat, it's going to be pasul, because not because of the material, but because of its height. Right? A sukkah that is lemala me'esrim amah is pasul. Right? And now you have quote unquote schach pasul above schach kasher, which automatically enters what we discussed in the previous shiur, that they are considered together. And according to the Ravya, even if you have a nice solid schach on the bottom, still schach pasul is going to be any area that you have schach on the top. It considers as though the area underneath that there's no schach, there's only schach pasul, and then you'll end up with not silata meruba mechamata on the schach of the bottom sukkah, which will render the bottom sukkah invalid as well. But it's a very easy thing to make that equation, that top lemala lemata doesn't make a difference. That's why we need the chidush of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that this case of tachtona kashera elyona psula, that the bottom one is kasher, top one is pasul, still would be a valid case. So said the Gemara, okay, now you teach me that sukkah tachat sukkah. This is where we left off in the middle of what is exactly the minimum level of height for the sukkah to be considered a sukkah tachat sukkah. If you have two layers of schach, one of them is schach pasul, one of them is schach kasher, or in the sukkah tachat sukkah details that we had, how far the two schachs do have to be for them to be considered two layers of schach, not one? So Gemara said, well, one tefach is enough. The Gemara is going to discuss multiple shitas here. So the first one that the Gemara brings is one tefach cubic is what you need, because if you have an area, this is really from the Mishnayot in Masechet Ohalot, in Perek Gimal, Mishnah Zayin, that the minimum amount to transfer, to be an important area to transfer the tum'ah is one tefach by one tefach in the height of one tefach. So you have this area, which is, imagine if this is one tefach on one tefach, and then it has a height of a tefach as well. If you have anything underneath, imagine if this is a full cube, right? right? That's how you're looking at it. Then it would be, if you have a piece of corpse underneath this, then if this is even a long beam and there's anything else on the other side, the tum'ah would transfer. And also, it blocks the tum'ah from going up. So if you have open area of 1 tefach underneath it, then if you put something on top of the roof of this, even though that's directly above the piece of corpse, is not going to take the tum'ah. So therefore, if I have here a ceiling that's a tefach in between them, and I have something tahor sitting on top of this, even though that's directly above the dead body, it's not going to become tameh, because the tum'ah hovers underneath this area, and even if this area is 1 mile long, anything underneath this will become tameh because ohel, but anything above. But if this is just a tiny bit shorter than tefach, then anything underneath this is not going to become tameh, but exactly the opposite. Now this is considered stuck to the dead body, and the tum'ah penetrates through this and goes all the way to rakia. So if you have something sitting on top of this coffin, or coffin is a good example, right? Then it's going to become tameh as well. So you see that the area of tefach height is the minimum area that is considered effective and important. We see this in Mishnayot Ohalot, but we could use it here, says the Gemara. So that's the first shita that the Gemara discusses it.
Rabbi, is there a limit of how far it can go out or how far it can go up?
No, until Shamayim. Could go. That's why, by the way, El Al flights, they avoid the area of well, for the Kohanim, the area of cemeteries, but meaning the Har HaZeitim and so on, but also they avoid the area of the Beit HaMikdash, of Har HaBayit, and that area, because, again, the Tum'ah and the Kedusha don't have a limit going up, but certainly for Kohanim would be actually a question, because the plane is aluminum, is ohel zaruk. This gets into a lot of very geschmack questions of driving in a path on Bet HaKvarot, when you have a tree, that half of the tree is over a kever and the other half is over the path going up. You have this in some of the so-called Jewish cemeteries in multiple different cities. So it's something to be mindful, of course, but the Gemara brings this as a Mishnah quoted from Masechet Ohalot. The fact the Gemara says the Tanya is a mistake has to be Titnan as an explicit Mishnah in Perek Zayin, Mishnah Gimel of Masechet Ohalot.
Why isn't it 3 tvachim? Because we have lovid. It's like if something is within 3 tvachim, it's like the same as if it's,
That's exactly why the Mishnah, the question is, why don't we say lavud, right? Because here we are discussing sukkah, schach, which means we want to know the least important area that could be considered a tent, an ohel. So where do you go for that? You go to Masechet Ohalot, tents, right? And we find, it's Halacha Moshe Misinai, right? This Mishnah is Halacha Moshe Misinai, as Rashi says over here in the first wide line or second wide line, that a tefach by tefach, berum tefach, is considered the minimal amount of ohel when it comes to the halachot of tumah v'tahara, and we don't say lavud in that case. Just like lavud is halacha Moshe Misinai, the tumah v'tahara of ohel is also halacha Moshe Misinai. So says the Gemara, that's the first shita that's discussed, and maybe that would be considered a schach. So says the Gemara, Rabba bar Rav Huna Amri, this is the first shita. Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, they say arba'a. It has to be 4 tfachim at least, because any area that has to be important, and again, don't learn from the halachot of tumah v'tahara, because that is a very specific thing only for tumah v'tahara. Here we need an important area. Important area has to be at least 4 tfachim. We find this in Masechet Shabbat, for Reshut HaYachid. In Masechet Eruvin, even in Masechet Yumaf Legabe, what is considered a petach for mezuzah, and also in height for gates and petachim is considered the minimum amount. So therefore, they say it has to be at least arba'at tfachim shelo matzinu makom chashuv pachot ma'arba'a, because we don't find an important place that is it is counted as its own thing. And here is something that we need it to be counted as its own thing. It's a sukkah al gabe sukkah. So therefore, it has to be a minimum of 4 tfachim away from the bottom schach. So top schach, bottom schach, 4 tfachim away, that's the minimum. Shmuel says, wait a second. I have a great thing to say. We are saying over here there has to be sukkah al gabe sukkah, right? To be a sukkah sitting on top of another sukkah. Does anyone happen to remember what was the minimum amount of sukkah that we needed for the lowest sukkah ever? 10 tfachim. So Shmuel, we need 10 tfachim at least, because it has to be a sukkah that's livable. Less than 10 tfachim. What did the Gemara call it? Rabotai, you remember? A diras rucha. It's not a livable space. So says Shmuel, we need it to be at least an area hollow of 10 tfachim. Shmuel amar asara. My tama de Shmuel. Why did Shmuel say asara? Because ke'echshera kach psula. It has to be a sukkah that it's in and of itself is kasher, and now when you pile it on top of another sukkah, it will be sukkah al gabe sukkah, which will become pasul, or will render the bottom one pasul. So ma hechshera be'asara, just like its hechsher needs a minimum amount of asara tefachim, 10 tefachim, af psula, even the pisul of it needs also asara tefachim. Now the Gemara asks a powerful question on Shmuel. You ready for this? Tanan. In our very Mishnah, we learned that there's machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim, right? To brush up quickly, and the top of Tet Amud Bet, the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im en diurin be'elyona tachtona psula. If the top one doesn't have anyone living in there, then the bottom one is pasul. Which, by the way, means that Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and they hold whatever he says is not true, right? That means even if you have diurin in the top one, still the bottom one is considered that halakha, right? Even if you don't have diurin in the top one, still the bottom one is pasul, according to Chachamim, right? Says the Gemara, we are going to turn that as a bombshell for Shmuel. Says, well, did you read the Mishnah? Let's do this together. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im en diurin be'elyona tachtona kashera. If there is no one living on the top one, then the bottom one is kasher, says Rabbi Yehuda. My en diurin, let's understand, what does that mean? There are really no residents? As though residence or non-residence makes a difference? It's the structural thing. If it's livable, or versus it's not livable. Not if there are actual people living there. Who cares about people living there or not? Nobody cares about people. We want to know if it's considered a livable sukkah. Ilama diurin mamash. If you say actual people living there, atu diurin kakarmi. The people living there make a difference. They don't make any difference. Lav my en diurin. It's pashut that when it says that if there's nobody living there, Rabbi Yehuda means if it's not livable. Kol she'ena re'uya ledira, first wide line. When it's not livable, when it's not fit for living, then, says Rabbi Yehuda, the bottom one is going to be kasher. Right? And what does that mean? It means livable, what we said before. That's 10 tfachim high. Right? So Rabbi Yehuda, so now let's fill in the blanks of the Mishnah and read it. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's not 10 tfachim high, then the bottom one is kasher, which means Chachamim hold the what? That even if it is livable, so even if it's not livable, it means even if it's not, it still is The same halacha. Says the Gemara, Ve'echi dami lo gvoa asara, miklat de tarakama savar afal pi she'ena reuya letira pasula. That even though that's not 10 tefachim, still is pasul.
Because
Right? The Tarakama argues with Rabbi Yehuda. And according to this understanding, the Tarakama would tell you that even if the height between the two schachs are not 10 tefachim, still the bottom one is pasul. But you just said, Shmuel, anything less than 10 tefachim is considered one schach. You have to have a minimum of 10 tefachim to be sukkah al gabe sukkah. Anything within 10 tefachim, within, let's call it 39 inches, will be considered what? One schach, one sukkah. It's not sukkah al gabe sukkah. You see, from our Mishnah, says the Gemara, not like that. Ki ata Rav Dimi. Now Rav Dimi the Gemara tries to answer this with reading the Mishnah a little differently. It says Rav Dimi is one of the people who came from Eretz Yisrael, right, to Bavel, and he always has either halachot in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who was the Rosh Hashiva in Eretz Yisrael, or it says Amri b'Ma'arava. They say in Eretz Yisrael. I remember in Eretz Yisrael they said like this, right? So this is one of those. Kiata Rav Dimi Amar. Amri b'Ma'arava. Rav Dimi said, you know how they in Eretz Yisrael they learned this Mishnah on Tet Amud Bet on the top? Im ena tachtona yechola lekabel karim vekesatot shel elyona. It means if the schach of the bottom one, which is the floor of the top one, if the floor of the top one is not strong enough to be able to hold the mattresses and the pillows on the of the top sukkah, when you want to sleep and you want to lay down, then that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. If the top one is not sturdy enough to be livable, then the bottom one is kasher. It means it can't support people living in it. It can't support the weight of your mattress and your blankets and your pillows. That's what it means.
yes, sir.
Right? So that's another way of diras rucha. It means, in other words, it's not a matter of height, right? It is taller than 10. So this way we're trying to take away the question from Shmuel, right? Really, it is taller than 10. We're not talking about diras rucha. But it's a diras rucha in a different way. It's not sturdy enough to be able to, that the floor could hold the weight of your mattress and yourself sleeping on it. It's going to fall through. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. If it can't hold your weight, then the bottom one is kasher, because this floor is considered not to be there. Right? We imagine it's not there. So the Gemara says, wait a second, that doesn't really help. Because who cares what type of diras rucha you have? It will turn out, if I fill in the blank like Rabbi Dimi now, it will come out that even though that the floor of the top one, which is the ceiling of the bottom one, is so flimsy that it can't hold my mattress and my pillow and blanket, still the bottom sukkah is pasul. Even though that this schach is so flimsy that's as if it's not there, still the bottom one is pasul, Chachamim would say, right? And why is that? Because of diras rucha, because that's not, it's a diras rucha, and still Chachamim say it's pasul. So still is a question on Shmuel, because who cares if it's a diras rucha? It's still going to be according to Chachamim. Pasul, Shmuel seems to only work with Rabbi Yehuda. Mar says, no, that's not true. Ika benayhu diyechola lekabel al yedei adechak. Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda are not disagreeing if it's mamash pasul. In this case, that it could hold the mattress, but it could hold it al yedei adechak. Is hardly could hold it. You have to be really tiptoeing and be careful. Use the lightest pillow and lightest blanket and all that. The koshi, you could live there, right? But not, you can't put like your Helix mattress and put the, jump on top of it and have a pillow fight. Can't do that, right? So that is the machloket that they have. That says the Gemara, the yechola lekabel al yedei adechak, that he could hold it al yedei adechak. Then Chachamim say, well, it has to be for it to be kasher, it has to be really thing. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, so that's the machloket that they have, and that answers the question on Shmuel in both accounts as well. So says the Mishnah, Lex Mishnah.
Sorry, the mental block here. How could the floor of the upper sukkah ever be sturdy enough to hold anyone in it? If it's sturdy enough to hold anyone, then it's not schach. You have to put, I don't know, concrete, metal.
No, it's again the schach. It's a good question. I think we addressed it in a different way in the previous year also. Really, certainly midoraita, you could even have planks of wood on top as schach, right? The only reason that we need narrower things is because of a gezerat tikra, which we haven't studied yet. Midrabanan is you can't have wide planks of wood, but even midrabanan you could have woods that are less than a tefach, and they could be even a tefach thick. You're talking about really sturdy pieces of wood. No, well, you have them set up. You could have it even nowadays if you want. You could have beams small, less than tefach thick, and you set them up next to each other. It just takes a lot of time. That's why people prefer bamboos, that you just roll it up and roll it down and you're done. But really, if you want to go set up smaller pieces of beams, less than a tefach wide, they could also be thick. And those are very sturdy. You could jump on top of it and still is kasher. Nowhere it says that the schach has to be flimsy enough that you stand on it and it falls through. Right? It has to just pass all the boxes of a kasher schach. That means it has to be something that grows from the ground. It's cut off already from the ground. It's not mekabel tum'ah, right? And you don't have the rabbinic things of being a wide 4x4 feet wood, which again, midoraita, that would be kasher. You can imagine, like midoraita, you could have a nice, if you didn't have the gezerat tikra and other considerations which we're going to see, that would really be even kasher. But nowadays, of course, you have to do it, but still you could make a very, very sturdy schach.
Do we say that if a sukkah is dir sukkah that the whole sukkah is pasul?
It would be, the whole sukkah would be pasul. The question over here is,
Makes sense.
the only question over here is, does that make it that now the bottom one is going to be kasher?
Of course.
In other words,
No, it wouldn't be though.
no, it would be, because if the top one doesn't have a good schach, right, and the bottom one, right, has a good schach, but it is not sturdy enough that the person could live on top of that. Imagine you put a bunch of bamboos, a bamboo mat. You can't stand down on top of it, it's going to fall through, right? But it's a good schach, right?
Right.
Is that considered sukkah al gabe sukkah? And the answer is, well, if you can't live on top of it, then it's not, according to Rabbi Yehuda,
Top one
the way we understood it, right? The way we understood it now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would be not a livable space, and that would be Rabbi Yehuda's chiddush.
That the top one would be pasul, because it wouldn't be.
And the bottom one would be kasher, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Right? If you can't live, if the top one is not livable, then the bottom one would be kasher. Again, that's only Rabbi Yehuda. According to Chachamim, it would be different, of course. But again, we needed to bring this in to understand what is the minimum amount of sukkah al gabe sukkah according to Shmuel. We were trying to ask and answer a question on Shmuel. Now, the next Mishnah that we're going to discuss is going to be a fascinating Mishnah, which is actually very relevant because people deal with mosquitoes in the warmer places and with leaves falling inside the sukkah in other places. So it's very popular to want to have some sort of netting system inside your sukkah. I can't tell you how many questions I got this year for this, wanting to net your whole sukkah. Can it be kasher to have a net beneath or on top of your schach? Or can you make one of those tents, the net tents that you put over your bed and you go inside of it in order to be safe from those creatures, is that kasher? Can I sleep in a net bag inside my sukkah, or can I not? All of that is going to be discussed with Hashem in the next